Hi, it's David Cowan back again with case number 2 from our Out of the Vault series. The time frame is still the Revolutionary War, which was from 1775 to 1783. And now we're going to look at currency. Currency both from several states and from the national government at that time, which is known as the Continental Congress. The note we're looking at now is actually from the first day of the Second Continental Congress on May 10th, 1775. So shortly after the actual fighting started at the battles of Lexington and Concord. And one of the first things Congress does is issue money. And in this particular case, there's some beautiful marbling on the left-hand side of the note, which is attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Now, there are often on bills of this period Latin phrases of encouragement. And in this particular case, on the front side, there is an image of a gust of wind being blown over the water, and the Latin phrase translates as energy. Also at this time, you can see that it's in Spanish mill dollars that the reference to is, because we're some 15-ish years before Alexander Hamilton will create the report on a mint and a United States currency. It is backed by gold or silver, this note, and we know that this note, like all the other continental notes, is going to rapidly depreciate, leading to a famous phrase in American history, not worth a continental. On the back side of the note is another interesting Latin inscription, which translates loosely as, "Homes will cease to be quiet," which is anticipating much fighting that is about to happen. Now, looking at several states, we're going to first look at a Georgian note. You can see this is quite complex. And we see that this note is not going to be backed by gold or silver, but rather by forfeited properties. This is properties that patriots would take from individuals that remained loyal to the British Crown. Now, it's interesting because there was a lot of fighting that happened in Georgia. In fact, Savannah is occupied for part of the war. So you often have to wonder whether these lands would actually be there when you had this note and wanted to produce it. The Latin that's on this bill is translated loosely as "no impunity." So very harsh words indeed. And next we're going to look at a note from South Carolina. And this note is important for what it says, not just on the front, which is Latin translated about much hope, but rather what's on the back side. Notice that in 2 places it says "death to counterfeit." And the reason for this is that the British were not only trying to beat us militarily, but also economically as well. And then interestingly, in the middle of the note, there are 4 different Hebrew letters. I'm not quite sure why, but it is interesting to point out. Next, we're going to look at a note from 1779. It's actually called a Bill of Exchange, signed by none other than George Washington. And the backstory here is that, as you know, we were having very difficulty meeting our obligations, and particularly paying interest, let's say, on our debt. And one of the success stories of the Revolution is Benjamin Franklin is over in France at the court of Louis XVI. And he's going to get Louis XVI to lend America a tremendous amount of money. And one of the things that they do is he's going to give the money to pay the interest on the debt. But this money is in France. It's not in America. So what happens now is Congress, when they hear this, they start issuing these drafts against that money. These drafts are going to trade in the open market because no one really wants to go over to France to collect their money. That doesn't make sense. And therefore, it's traded in the coffee houses at somewhat depreciated prices until they find a merchant who needs to pay for goods over in Paris or in France, and he'll send this note over. And that's exactly what happened here. If you look at the back side, it's signed by none other than William Bingham. Bingham is one of the wealthiest people in America at that time. He's a patriot and a merchant, and you can see that he's endorsed it over to his bankers that are in Paris. Now, interestingly, when this occurred, these type of bills of exchanges, they made 4 of them. There was quadruple redundancy. This is the second draft, and the reason for that was if you sent it over, you would send it by 4 different ships, and that way the first draft that got there would be the one that was honored, the other 3 would be not honored or be discarded. In this particular case, it is the second draft. The next item up also relates to France because we're going to open a bank here in America, the first bank ever during the war, called the Bank of North America. And what do you need? You need gold or silver in its vaults, which we don't have. Louis XVI again is going to give us 40 casks of silver to open this bank. the bank's going to be in Philadelphia, and you can't land the silver in Philadelphia because Philadelphia is blockaded by the British. You can't land it in New York because New York's occupied. So the silver's landed in Boston. It makes its way, guarded by the Marine Corps as well as Continental soldiers, down to Philadelphia. They open the bank, the money is lent to the government, and they pay the soldiers at the head of the elk right before they go down to Yorktown for the first time they've been paid in 5 or 6 years. And so quite a morale boost. Now this particular check is very interesting. It's been pressed into a book. And if you look at it, says cashier the bank. And the reason you don't have to say the bank's name is because there's only one bank in existence at that time. There's some anti-counterfeiting devices on the left. We're in Pennsylvania dollars. We're still some 10 years before the report in a minute when Hamilton is going to straighten all this out with a US dollar. It's from one merchant to another, from John Kidd to Nash Richardson. But what's fascinating is the date, 2 July 1782. This is the earliest known bank check you can see in the public domain. I have seen one other, but it's earlier but in complete tatters, and so really can't be shown. What I like to say about this check also is, if you put a routing number on the bottom of this check, even though we're 238 years later, everybody knows what it is. The last object is from after the war, from 1785. Recall the war ends in 1783. We commence as a country after the Constitutional Convention. The states ratify it. George Washington takes the oath of office on April 30th, 1789 at Federal Hall in New York. And in this particular case, we're in 1785, and we're looking at a pay order to Michael Early, a soldier from Pennsylvania. Now, he was likely paid previously in depreciated currency, and this is the interest payment on that depreciated currency. But what is really interesting is who signed it. And it's the head, the governor, or in this case, the president of the state of Pennsylvania, B. Franklin, none other than Benjamin Franklin. And it's a very interesting world where privates' pay orders are getting signed in person by the head of the state. We'll be back again next week with our third installment. Hope to see you then.